It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us back on the show to talk about his newest book, Probes, Deep Sea Diving into St. John's Gospel, Questions for Individual or Group Study, is Dr. Peter Kreeft. Thanks for being here, Dr. Kreeft.
Thanks for having me.
So, when was the last time that you participated in a group Bible study or a so-called faith-sharing group of some sort?
Never did it once in my life.
But you wrote a book on how to do one.
Right.
Good.
Because it's a new kind of Bible study.
It is, and this is such a unique book. I think it's fascinating. Last time you were on the show was episode 651, was to talk about your book, Symbol or Substance, A Dialogue on the Eucharist with C.S. Lewis, Billy Graham, and J.R.R. Tolkien, which really encourage ecumenical dialogue. And you mentioned that in this book as well, that it could do the same. So is that a priority of yours these days, to encourage ecumenical dialogue?
It's a natural secondary priority. It's not the main purpose. The main purpose is simply to do what the title says, to do some deep sea diving in the very profoundly deep ocean of John's Gospel.
Why did you choose St. John's Gospel for this project?
Because it's probably the most profound and philosophical of the Gospels, and the Gospels are the most important part of the New Testament, and the New Testament's the most important part of the Bible, and the Bible is the greatest book in the world, and books are the main way we learn.
So it just followed. What specifically about St. John's Gospel do you think sets it apart from the other three?
It's reflective. For instance, the others have dozens of miracles. John has only 7, but he probes more deeply into those 7 than the others do. And it's a kind of a God's eye point of view gospel. It starts with Christ's eternal divinity. In the beginning was the Word. And throughout the gospel, it's a kind of a mixture of God's point of view and our point of view, because Christ is both God and man. And John was also the youngest and the apparent favorite of the disciples. He calls himself the disciple Jesus loved. Mm-hmm. And he lived the longest, and he reflects the most.
And so this book has probing questions, 1,450 questions, and I think this is what might stump people. There's no answers. You just ask the questions. So what made you think... There
are answers, but the answers are in the gospel and in your mind, in dialogue when you study. I don't give you the answers.
Yeah, what made you want to do that instead of... A lot of people would just do it as a question-answer format and give people the answers. Why did you want to leave that as almost like a detective story that you have to find the answers?
It is a detective story. Who is that masked man anyway? I did it because that's what I do in class. I'm a teacher, and I think the very best method ever invented by teaching was invented by the 2 greatest cultures in the ancient world, both of which survived and have contributed enormously to Western civilization. One of them is Greek culture, and Socrates is a great teacher there, and the Socratic method, of course, is asking questions. And the other is Jewish culture, and the rabbis use something very much like the Socratic method. Favorite Jewish joke, why does a rabbi always answer a question with another question? Answer, why shouldn't a rabbi answer a question with another question? Answer that.
I like it. So a lot of those, though, would take place in some kind of controlled environment where you ask the question, but it's moderated. So whenever they give the answer, you can either tell them if they're right or try to guide them with another question. But with this, you're not actually able to interact with the people. So how would they eventually get to the right answer if they don't have that guidance?
Well, that's half right and half wrong. There is no one leader who has all the answers, but you do interact with other people. If this is not done in a group, which is the best way, then you split your own mind into 2 parts, and there's at least a dialogue.
You mentioned that the book is worthless itself. So where do you get the value with this book?
In another book, John's Gospel. The whole point of a window is to see the real world outside of it. And John's Gospel is a window, and it's an incredibly valuable window. But it's not to be studied simply for its own sake. It's to be studied for the sake of the one about whom everything that ever existed finds its meaning in, and it's Christ.
So what do you think are some of the key takeaways from John's Gospel that you think this book and this particular method of asking these questions is going to help people to understand in a different way?
if you go through John's Gospel with my book or in any other book in a thoughtful way, you'll see that Christ is far bigger and deeper and more wonderful than you ever conceived before, and that there's no end to it. It's a sea without a bottom.
We're talking with Dr. Peter Kreeft. The book is called Probes, Deep Sea Diving into St. John's Gospel, Questions for Individual or Group Study. And you said that you have actually not participated in a group study yourself, but you suggest that this is done in a group study, and you actually give a pretty detailed description on how those meetings would go by preferably meeting weekly, and you really give a great outline for the meetings itself and participation. It's kind of like a masterclass in small groups. So can you go over some of the components for a successful discussion on your book?
Well, first of all, everybody has to have responsibility for active participation. Nobody can sit there and listen to the other people. So this is not like a movie theater. This is like a tug of war with everybody pulling on the rope, or rowing with everybody having an oar. And there's no one answer. There's no single answer like in a crossword puzzle that you have to find, and then when you're finished, you're finished. You can spend as much time as you want on each verse. You take turns addressing the questions and doing the best you can, and then the other people in the group participate. And there's dialogue, not argument, but dialogue about what each person saw in that verse. And everybody in the group is somewhat enlightened by other people's points of view. That's why God gave us two eyes instead of one. And that's why we tell stories, so we can look at the world from the viewpoint of different characters. I use that very basic principle as the kind of group that there ought to be if you study this book. It's not sitting side by side and listening to the guy who has all the answers. It's finding answers yourself.
Right, and you specifically talk about like not having a leader. If there was a priest in, he should be treated like everybody else and not as the expert that everybody turns to, but that everybody has equal participation, even if they're shy. There's so many just great tips in here that I think are good for any small group discussion, but particularly for going something like this where you're going through a bunch of questions like this.
The key to making it a different kind of group discussion, though, is that we're not just there to communicate to other people how we feel. It's not just sharing and caring, good as that is. The focus is not on the people in the group. The focus is on John's Gospel. And all of us are looking at the same thing.
Sure.
And that's also a way to overcome shyness, because if the point of having a group is to share, there's a lot of shy people who don't want to share their own private feelings. But if the focus is to get yourself out of the way and explore what John is saying, and ultimately explore what Jesus is saying to you, that is, I think, a great way to overcome shyness. It's self-forgetfulness.
All right, well, where is the best place for people to pick up the copy of this?
Either Ignatius Press or on any full-service bookstore or Amazon.com.
All right, a great program to do as a small group for sure. You could do it individually, like you mentioned, but best if you did it with a group of other people. It's called Probes, Deep Sea Diving into St. John's Gospel, Questions for Individual or Group Study. Really well put together, and I can't believe how many questions you came up for this. It's so good. Thank you so much, Dr. Peter Kreeft.
You're welcome. God bless you.